All right, welcome to the Chapter 5 demo. We're going to be talking about a topic called Basic Sketching and Modify Tools this week. Before we get into that though, let's do some quick review over the Chapter 4 stuff that we learned last week. We put together a kitchen. We learned about a lot of different things related to families. One of the takeaways that we have to remember with families is that there are two distinct types of families. What we're looking at here are component families. Component families are differentiated from system families in that they can be brought in from a library. They can exist as files on their own out on your hard drive. And system families, things like walls and floors and roofs, cannot. Those actually only exist and live within projects. And that's where they're created and defined as well. Component families like cabinets and stoves and chairs and furniture, those are created in the Revit Family Editor. So just kind of hold on to that concept. We're going to get a little bit more into both of those types of families later on in the semester. But for now, just kind of try your best to grasp the difference between those two things. One of the concepts that is related more to kitchen design in terms of how we draw it up in CAD, more so than Revit specific stuff, is that cabinets typically, if they're going to be bought from a store, they're already pre-manufactured. We've talked about this in the past probably, but it's worth mentioning again that cabinets typically are going to come in 3-inch increments in terms of their width. So from side to side on a cabinet, and it's true whether it's a wall cabinet or a floor cabinet, a base cabinet, they're going to come in 3-inch increments. And so they might start with something as small as a 9-inch wide cabinet and go all the way up to maybe 3 or 4 feet wide. But they're only going to come typically in 3-inch increments, and that's just something that is a standard across the industry. Does not apply to custom cabinets. Those can be built any size that you want, but 3-inch increments is a thing to remember. And where that becomes important is when we have to fill in a wall-to-wall distance. Now, we didn't do that in this case. We have an L-shaped kitchen, but in a lot of cases, we're going to have a U-shaped kitchen, and at least one of those walls is going to be covered all the way from corner to corner with cabinets. And so making sure that that math comes out right is important. So the concept to remember there is that if you add up all the cabinets and it's divisible by 3 inches, that is a good width to set for that corner to corner distance. However, that corner to corner distance does have to include the gypsum board because cabinets are fastened to a finished wall, not to a framed wall. So we have to factor in that 1/2-inch thickness of gypsum board. And in speaking with contractors who actually do install cabinets for a living, I've been told on a few different occasions that it's a good idea to add a 1 or 2 inch buffer. So whatever that wall-to-wall calculation is, add 1 or 2 inches on there because typically the framers and the drywall finishers are not going to end up with a very, very precise distance. So we don't want to have to cut the cabinets to make them fit. Two other things I want to talk about related to families. One of them is the importance of knowing how to create new types of a particular family. So for instance, this cabinet right here, if we want to come up with one that's a little bit wider or a little bit narrower, we just don't have it in our library, we can't load it. We can make a copy of this through the type properties, and we can make a new one just by changing the parameters. So remember, we're going to edit the type, and then once we get into the type properties, if we are going to make changes to the parameters, best practice is going to be to first duplicate, create a new type with a new name, and then change the parameters. It's never really a good idea to change the existing stuff. Just make a new one. It's very easy. Just duplicate, give it a new name, then go ahead and change the parameters, the dimensions. And that concept is true for really anything that you're doing inside the type properties. If you're going to make a new one, actually do make a new one. That's true for component families as well as system families. And then the last concept I want to make sure that everybody understands and remembers going forward is that type properties are not the same as instance properties. Remember that instance properties are those properties that you're going to change to affect just that thing that you have selected. Whereas type properties are going to affect all of them. So if you have 20 36-inch cabinets in your project and you make a change here, anywhere in the type properties, all of those existing instances of that cabinet are going to be affected. And that is also true with component families and system families. Okay, that's enough preamble, enough review of Chapter 4. Let's move on to Chapter 5. Today we're going to be starting with a template. And what I'd like for you to do is create a new project. We're just going to go to the File menu, use the new flyout, make sure you're using Project, and then you are going to browse to the residential default template for this one. So we're going to go ahead and click Browse. You're going to see default, let's see, where is it? Residential default right down here close to the bottom, residential default. Say Open and click OK. So here's what I'd like you to do. Start out by creating a 40 by 60, let's call it 60 by 40 building. And what I want you to do is, before you move on with this video, go ahead and pause it right now and just create the 4 walls that would sort of define the exterior walls of this building. Okay, so it's going to be 40 feet by 60 feet. Doesn't really matter which way it's oriented. But go ahead and do that. Pause this video now, and we'll come back and we'll talk about what you did. Okay, so we're back. Most of you probably clicked on the wall tool, and you did one of two things. You either used the line draw tool to create a 60 by 40 building by clicking your first point and then moving over here and either watching your listening dimension until you got to 60, or you might have even used the technique that we often do in AutoCAD and typed in 60 and hit enter. And then you did sort of a right turn and you got your alignment perfectly vertical, and then you typed 40, and then you kind of just repeated that coming back with 60, and then finally closing that with another 40. And that would be perfectly fine, okay? But we're going to do it a little bit differently. So what I'd like for you to do is take that building, just go ahead and grab those 4 walls and just move it off to the side. And now what I want you to do is use correct techniques, okay? Now, if you used these correct techniques that I'm about to demonstrate, good on you. You certainly would not have been expected to your first time through, though, because there are a lot of things that we have to think about whenever we're going to draw something. Let's go ahead and just take a quick look at the 3D view of this building. Okay, so we've got these 4 walls, and what type of walls are they? They're basic, generic 6-inch walls. So they don't have any real detail, and they're of a height that is sort of random. I happen to be, looks like I was on the first floor when I did that, which makes sense, right? But I didn't really check that, and nor did I check the type of wall, and nor did I check a lot of the other options that I have in here. So I want to take a slower walk through. I want to repeat this, but I want to take a little bit slower walk through this time and make sure that we're being very deliberate about the size of and the type of everything that we're using. This is what separates sketching from drafting, okay? Just being very deliberate about the size and the type and the shape and everything. You know, you really have to think it through when we're designing buildings. We don't want to leave anything to chance, and we certainly don't want things randomly chosen, right? Just letting chance sort of decide for us. We got to really think it all the way through. What we're really trying to do when we're designing is we're not just trying to put a building together in the computer. What we're trying to do is get the contractors to build the building that we intend to have. And the only way that we're able to do that successfully is by thinking it all the way through first before we ever start modeling. All right, so let's get to it. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with something called a reference plane. You may have seen this before. Over here on the right side of the architecture ribbon is the reference plane tool. We're going to go ahead and click on that. And what I'm going to do is basically sort of do a modified tic-tac-toe square, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 4 lines. I'm going to let them overlap each other. I'm going to let them cross a little bit at the corners. So I'm going to draw my first line right here, and I'm just going to do it a random length. And then I'm going to do another line right here, and again, let it cross. I'm going to do a random length there as well. Now these next two lines I need to make sure are exactly 60 feet apart this way and 40 feet apart this way. So what I'm going to do is take this line, I'm going to copy it, this reference plane. I'm going to copy it over 60 feet. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this, but I'm going to copy it down 40 feet. And now I've got the framework for my building. Now, why did I draw reference planes? Well, reference planes are there to sort of informally control the perimeter of the shell of my building, okay? And these reference planes are going to align with a very specific part of the exterior walls that I'm going to be adding to this thing. And typically that's going to be what we call the core boundary of the wall. The core boundary can be defined as, if it's a concrete wall, we would sort of think of that as the outside surface of that concrete wall. And if it's a framed wall, if it's a stick-built wall made out of lumber, that would be the outside surface of the stud layer of the wall, okay? So that's what we're really trying to align to this thing. But one of the other best practices that we like to use with these reference planes is we like to, once we get them in the position that we want, we're going to pin those things in place so that they don't move, because there are a lot of things that align with these reference planes. These reference planes are going to be visible on multiple levels, and we can make sure that that outside face of that framed wall is going to perfectly align with that, as will the foundation. So what I'd like for you to do is select all four of those reference planes, and you can click them all. You can click them individually by holding the Control key, or you can just draw a crossing window around all four of them. But once they're selected, you're going to go up into the ribbon, and you're going to see this little push pin right here. We're going to go ahead and just pin those in place. Now, if you're not sure you got those spaced correctly, you can always double check that using the measure tool. You can just kind of check and see what the distance is. I have 40 there. I hit escape. I'm going to try again going the other way, and I can see I have 60 there. You could also put on an actual dimension if you want to. Either way works just fine, but I'm confident that I got them in the right place. So now I can select those things and just click this pin tool, and those things are pinned in place. You'll know it's pinned because if you pick on one, if you click one, you can see that it's pinned here. If you do need to move that, you can always unpin it just by clicking on the icon, and then it removes that pin. Okay, so you can just kind of toggle back and forth between pinned and not pinned. The nice thing about pinning something is it's easy to unpin, but it won't move unless you unpin it. There's no way to move it. If I click and drag it up here, try to move it, try to delete it, anything, it's not going to do it. So it's a nice safety measure. You'd be surprised how many times it's easy to accidentally move something without realizing you're doing it in Revit. Okay, next step, let's go ahead and create some walls, and we're going to basically just trace that rectangle we just created. But the thing I want to do first, before I ever start laying that wall in, is check my settings. So let's go ahead and check the options bar. That's the green bar that shows up when you have certain commands active. In this case, it's the wall tool. And so I'm going to take a look at this. The height of this wall is set at unconnected currently 20 feet. Now, that's okay. We can definitely set the wall at a 20-foot height, but in most cases in Revit, we're going to want the top of that wall controlled by something else. And if you're thinking that maybe that should be controlled by a level, that's probably a good bet, right? The base of the wall is already going to be controlled by a level. We know that because it's going onto the first floor. So the base constraint by default is going to be first floor. The top constraint, as you see here, is unconnected at 20 feet. So these parameters that you see in the options bar are there for convenience, but you're going to also see them listed here in the properties palette. Changing either one does the exact same thing. Doesn't matter. Okay. So let's go ahead and change this from unconnected to second floor. We're going to go ahead and just run this wall from the first floor to the second floor. We're just going to go with that for now. And you can see in the properties that it's indicating that that unconnected height of that wall, if it is held by the second floor, currently is going to be set at a 9-foot height. All right, next item, the location line. This is the part of the wall that is attached to your cursor when you're drawing. Remember that a wall has thickness. When you're drawing with lines, they don't have thickness. It's just basically one-dimensional, right? So you follow this path from point to point. Where within that wall are we defining? That's the question. That's what the location line is doing. Okay. So we typically are not going to draw a wall with the center line as the location line. We're going to use one of the core faces typically. So we're going to go ahead and just stick with our plan, and that is going to be drawing the wall with the core face exterior as our location line. Right here we have chain selected, and that just means that if I pick 2 points, it's going to prompt me for a third point, so I can continue adding legs of that wall if I want to. So we'll go ahead and just leave that checked. Offset is there if we need to draw a wall a specific distance from our location line. We're not going to do that today, but just know that that's an option as well. And then we always want to make sure that the join status is set to allow, even though we could change that later if we want to. We want walls that intersect each other to join automatically. That's usually the best way to go. The last piece I'm going to show you, and it's probably one of the most important pieces, is to pick the wall type that you want to use. So because we used the architectural residential template, we're going to have some residential type walls in here. And one of them that should be fairly familiar to you by now is the exterior wood siding on wood stud. That's one that's pretty common in residential construction. So let's go ahead and select that one. And now I think we've gone through and we've set all the settings that we need. We're going to go ahead and lay these walls in here. Now, we could definitely draw it one line at a time using that chain option, but I think something that would be a lot faster would be to use the rectangle tool in this case, and that way we only have to pick 2 points instead of 4. So let's go ahead and do that. And right now I'm going to hover in on the intersection of this corner, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to pick this corner. Before I do though, I want to make sure that my wall is not inside out. So my goal was to have my location line set to the outside core boundary. And even though I don't have my detail level set to fine, I can't see the layers within this wall, I can tell that this is the outside face of the stud pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that second point. And now I zoom out a little bit and I can see that those 4 walls all look like they're aligning with the correct point. Let's go ahead and double check though. We'll go ahead and change our detail level to fine, and then we'll zoom in on this wall. Make sure that you click on thin lines so you can see all the layers easily. And I can see pretty clearly that this inside layer is my gypsum board, and the outside layer that's aligned with my reference plane is the outside face of my stud layer. So another thing we can do to further sort of reduce the chances of making a mistake and moving this wall is we can lock this wall to the reference plane. So I'm going to actually ask you to do that. I want you to lock all 4 walls to the reference plane. The problem though is that we never got the lock icon, and so it's not really easy to just lock something to another thing. There's not really a lock command that you can do that with. So what we have to do is use the align tool, and when we align 2 things together, then that little lock icon shows up. So we're going to go, even though these things are already aligned properly, we're going to go ahead and use that align tool to get just to get that lock icon to show up. So I'm going to say I want to align to this wall. And sometimes when you hover, you don't see the thing that you're hoping that you will. Sometimes that can be fixed by just changing your preference up here. So you can see that the preference is set to wall center lines. We're going to go ahead and change that to faces of core and see if that gives us a little better result. And now you can see it highlighting that second point or that second object. So I click that, you can see the lock icon shows up, and now we lock that in place. Okay, let's go ahead and repeat that for this wall. We'll pick here, and then we'll pick here, and then lock that one in place. And let's just go ahead and do that with the other 2. Notice I do a lot of zooming in and out. You don't see me pan too often, and the reason for that is because it's really easy to zoom directionally. We've talked about this before, but it's worth mentioning again. If I want to zoom in on this corner, hold my cursor over this corner and I roll forward, and that's where I go. The reason I zoom in so much is so that I can see those individual layers, and I'm absolutely certain the portion of that wall that I'm picking. If If you try to do a lot of work out at this level, you're going to make mistakes. It's just inevitable. So get in the habit of zooming in close to your work, as close as you want, not too close, right? Still want to be able to see everything, but definitely get in there. Don't be shy with that scroll wheel button. It's free. So now we have all 4 walls aligned and locked to our reference planes. If I try to grab that reference plane and move it, nothing happens. But look what happens when I try to move the wall now. If I accidentally grab that wall and try to move it, it will move, but it's going to give me one of these. So this is one of the reasons why we pay attention to these warning messages. Make sure that you read the warning messages. I can't count how many times students have come to me and said, yeah, I got this warning message and it wouldn't do the thing I wanted it to do. And so you know what my first question is going to be? What was the warning message? I don't know. I didn't write it down, or I don't remember. I didn't read it, or something like that. Okay. So you got to know what Revit's telling you. You got to take a minute and just read it. Pretty soon you'll get into a habit of you'll just know what the warning message says, because when you did something wrong, you've done it so many times, you already know it. So you don't have to read it every time forever. All right, but until you get familiar with Revit and its behavior, make sure that you're reading these things. So it's telling me constraints are not satisfied. So I have an option at this point to go back and double check what I just did and see where I made my mistake. I might have been in a view where I couldn't see that wall and I couldn't see that it moved. So Revit's telling me that it did. I better check it out. Switch to another view, a 3D view or something, figure out what the problem is. So at this point I have an option. I can either remove constraints and let that move happen, or I can click cancel and it'll go back to the way it was. Okay, reference planes are great in vertical orientation as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at a south elevation view. And you can see those reference planes, they're the same exact plane, but it's showing the height now of those reference planes. You can see it's going all the way from just below my lowest level to just above my highest level. So those are going to be visible, these reference planes, on all of these levels that they're crossing. If, on the other hand, my reference plane, if I unpin this thing, if I pulled the end of this reference plane down, this reference plane will not be visible at the roof level. And if you're not sure you believe me, let's go ahead and take a look. If we go up to that roof plan level, that reference plane is now out of my view range. Okay, easy to bring back. Just go back to that view, and then we can just kind of pull it right back up to where it was, and now we would see that on the roof plan again. You're going to be working with reference planes quite a bit, so make sure you understand how they work, and if you go to a view and you can't see them, now you know why probably you wouldn't be able to. Now there is another option. There's a lot of reasons in Revit why you can't see something. One of them is it's just not in your view range, like we just demonstrated. Another possible reason, though, is that they're hidden in a view. If someone was working on a project you're collaborating with and they decided, you know what, I don't want to see these reference planes, they're kind of in my way, I could right click on this reference plane, say hide in view, oops, I did not mean to click that. Right click, hide in view, category, and then those reference planes, they're still there, they just can't see them in this particular view. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and undo that. Just keep that in mind, how reference planes work and the different things that could cause them to not show up. So I'm going to go back to the first floor view. Before we get too far along in all of this, one of the settings that is really critically important before we start laying in a bunch of walls is the temporary dimension setting. We may have talked about this in the past, but again, this is one of those things that's worth repeating. I'm going to go to the Manage tab, and under Additional Settings and under Annotations, yeah, they really bury this one, you'll have Temporary Dimension Settings. There's one that I want you to get in the habit of changing. Really should be the first thing you do when you start a new project, and you could build this into the template that you're using as well, but for whatever reason, none of the Revit templates have this set correctly, in my opinion, to faces of core. There are very few instances that I've come across in architectural design where you want to know the distance from the center line of a wall to another object. It just doesn't make sense. Contractors can't use a center line dimension to lay out a wall. When you lay the the bottom plate would basically cover the mark on the floor when you're trying to put a wall into a specific location. You got to dimension it to the edge of stud. That's the only way that they can be sure that it's in the right place. So consequently, our temporary dimensions and our permanent dimensions should all be from faces of core. Doors and windows, we do in fact measure to the center lines. And the reason for that is it just sort of accounts for any variations in the actual unit size of a window or door. It's still in the correct location if you measure to the center line. So I don't want to go any deeper than that into that discussion right now, but just suffice to say these are your settings for your temporary dimensions. And since we're on the Manage tab, it's worth pointing out that just like in AutoCAD, you can customize how Revit snaps to things. Remember when we drew the walls, we saw that little snap icon at the intersection between the two reference planes. Well, if you want snaps to either be enabled or disabled, you can come in here and you can adjust that as you need to. So again, also on the Manage tab, just under Snaps over here in the ribbon. You have a few other settings in here that you could play around with. This one's kind of interesting, just the length, dimension, snap, increment. You probably notice when you're drawing something, it's sort of snapping to whole numbers. And it does depend on how far you're zoomed in or out. That changes a little bit. And then it also will snap to an angular dimension. So all of that stuff is kind of in this same setting window. Let's go ahead and draw an interior wall. We're going to go back to the Architecture tab for this. And most of the stuff that we're going to be doing is going to be this architectural type wall. So let's go ahead and click on that. And then let's pick a different wall type with our type selector. We're going to go ahead and pick from the interior selection. And for this one, we're just going to go ahead with this interior 4.5 partition. And I'm just going to draw a single wall all the way from sort of this north wall down to the south wall. You'll notice that it really doesn't matter where you go within that wall, as long as you're either at the surface or within it someplace, it's always going to join just like that. Okay, so you should see the same thing up here. So that's one of the things you don't necessarily have to zoom in really tight for. All right, but let's take a look at this wall for a minute. You can see that this temporary dimension is going to the face of core, right? Not to the center line of the wall, which is what we hoped it would do. Same thing here. But a lot of times these temporary dimensions, they don't exactly go where you hope they will. So it's critical that you know how to relocate, reposition these temporary dimensions, and in particular, the extension lines of those temporary dimensions. Because we use temporary dimensions to move things, right? If I lay this wall in here, it just sort of randomly at first, but then I come back and I want to set the exact distance between the exterior and the interior wall, I can do that just simply by changing this number to something else, right? 25, and it just jumps into position. But if I wanted to go, say, for 25 feet from the outside face, like where this reference plane is, I have to physically move this extension line over to that reference plane. So I would actually grab this grip, and it's always the one that's in the middle of the extension line, and I would click and drag it. I'm actually holding the left mouse button until I see the thing I want it aligned with highlight, and then I let go. Now you can see I'm at 25 foot 5.5 to the inside face of that stud layer. Now I can set that thing to something more precise, or whatever the dimension is that I'm looking for. You'll notice also that if you just tap on the grip, if you just click it, you don't click and drag it, but if you just click on it, it's actually going to, and I'm not able to actually grab it because I'm instead selecting that reference plane. So I'm just going to hide that for a minute temporarily. I'm going to go down to these sunglasses. I'm going to say hide element. So now when I click on this wall, if I click on this grip right here, it is not doing it. It's not doing what I was hoping it would. There, now it is. I'm not sure why it was doing that before. Yours might have also, but just drag it off of that. I think it was just a little glitch that it was having. But you'll notice it's toggling between the outside face and the center line. Some reason though, it is going to the This one is still going to the core, but this one is going to the finished face. Okay, so that's a little bit of a strange behavior, but we're going to just let that slide for now. I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. But just know that you also have, in addition to the ability to drag your grips to another item, you can also toggle around on the available options like that. Okay. Also, there are going to be times when you try to drag that grip and drop it on something, and that something won't highlight. Like right now, you can see that the outside surface is highlighting, but for whatever reason, the inside surface of that gypsum board layer is not, and that's where I want it to be. So what you can do to force it to highlight what you want is hover over that thing. Okay, I'm still clicking and dragging. I'm still holding my left mouse button right now. And then I'm going to tap the tab key. And as soon as I tap it, whatever I'm closest to is going to highlight. And now I can drop it on that thing. Now it's lined up with what I want. You end up doing that a lot more than you should probably have to. Revit, it's almost like Revit tries to grab the thing that you don't want. More often than it'll grab the thing that you do want. It is just not, it cannot read your mind. In fact, it just feels like it's working against you sometimes. So make sure that you know how to override Revit, and tapping that tab key is pretty universal across a lot of different commands in Revit. If you need to select something, if you tap the tab key, it's going to highlight that thing usually. Since we're talking about grips, let's go ahead and talk about some other ones. You probably notice when you select a wall, you get a few different icons that show up. Right? One of those is a grip. Right here, you can see there's a grip, and this is actually indicating the end of this wall. It's not at the end of the wall, but that is the end of wall grip. And if we click and drag that thing back, like so, and then let go, it'll actually shorten up that wall and it'll break that join. Now it's easy enough to bring that back, right? We can just kind of bring it back over here until it intersects with this wall again, and then it rejoins. So not difficult to do, but sometimes we find ourselves having to separate two walls or lengthen a wall even. We need to make it longer, right? So we can drag it past this wall too if we need to, but that grip is there in most cases. We also see there's an icon here that says disallow join. There are certain circumstances, although they're rare, where we don't want a wall to join with another one when we overlap it, right? In this case, I did not disallow the join. Let me try that again. I'm going to disallow that join, and now when I pull it over here, it's still joining. Interesting, okay? Okay, well, I just tried it again, and now it's not joining. Okay, so it's doing what it's supposed to now. So this is what it's supposed to do. If you disallow the join, which is the condition it's in right now, we drag it across. These walls will just basically overlap each other now. They're not joining. You can always change that condition back, but then you will have to sort of drag it away and then bring it back, and then it'll join up again. But it didn't. Interesting. Okay, this is fun. All right, Revit is really giving me grief tonight. There we go. All right, let's take a breath. Let's go ahead and bring in a door and a window. We're going to go ahead. These things are hosted items, so you remember they have to be embedded in a wall. They have to have a host. We'll go ahead and pick a slightly different door type. And we'll put in like a front door right here, something like that. This is a bypass door. Interesting. Okay. So we've got a door in there. Let's go ahead and bring in a window. We'll just kind of put whatever window I had selected in there. Okay. And then let's just go ahead and just click on one of those component families. So when I bring this window in, you'll notice that there's a little grip or an icon right here, a little symbol. That's a flip grip. And what that's going to do basically is when I click on it, it's just going to flip the orientation of that window. So now the outside is in and the inside is out. Side note, important one. Typically the glass part of the window is set to the exterior face of the wall. So currently this window is in backwards. This is the correct position for most windows. Doors are going to have something similar, but doors also are going to have a side-to-side grip. So this will flip it, the orientation in to out. This one flips the orientation left or right. Whoops. All right, I'm going to bring back my reference plane. Not that way. Reset, temporary, hide, isolate. There we go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and draw just a few more interior walls. I'm going to pause while I do it. You go ahead and do the same. Doesn't matter where you put them. Let's just put a few more dividing walls inside this building. Okay, so this is what I did. And really all I'm trying to do is demonstrate, how we're going to use the temporary dimensions. The temporary dimensions are going to be an important tool to use to get the walls where you need them, obviously, right? But the thing that may not be quite so obvious is how to move a wall once it's in position. It's fairly common to just put a wall in place and then move it into position to the specific distance using the technique that we just talked about, using the temporary dimensions. Okay, and this one, the temporary dimension is lining up with the correct part of the wall. So is this one here. So whatever I want that gap to be in there, I can just simply change that value right there. But the thing that's tricky sometimes is I want to select the wall that needs to move. Okay, so when I change this dimension, the wall that I have selected, this one, it's not highlighting there, now it is going to be the one that moves, not the one over here. Okay, so I've seen people do this, and I've done it myself, where I'll pick this wall and I'll change the dimension, and then I'll change this dimension and this wall moves back, right? When I really wanted to move this wall. So don't get caught in that trap. Don't get caught in that loop. Start on one end and work your way through. So in other words, if I want this to be a 10-foot gap, I'd select this first, create 10, and now I know I want this middle gap to be 14. So I have to deselect that wall, pick this one, and then change this to 14. Then this wall moves, right? Okay, so I know it sounds obvious, but you'd be really surprised how many people make that mistake where they just keep moving the same wall back and forth and they can't get the right dimensions that they want. So just remember that one. Sometimes we put the wrong type of wall in. If I accidentally put a generic wall in here, just remember you can just, anytime, you can pick the object that you want to change and then just change it with the type selector. It's also important to remember that if you did like all the wrong walls on the outside of the building, you can select all of them and do them all at once too. So when you need to make a change on multiple objects, it's usually best to select them all and do them all at once, just a little bit quicker. Remember that the crossing window in Revit works the same way that it does in AutoCAD. If you go right to left and cross it, it's a crossing window and it'll select the object. If you go left to right, it doesn't work that way. You have to contain the entire object within the rectangle, right, to pick it that way. We can also select something and multiple, you notice if you hold the control key down, the little plus symbol shows up by your cursor, and now you can pick multiple objects one at a time as well. Once you have all the objects selected that you want to change, you can go through and set any of the parameters in the instance properties in the properties window or the type selector itself. And of course, all of them that you had selected will change. Another handy tool related to selecting objects is the filter tool. And the filter tool actually uses a subtractive method for selection rather than an additive one, which we've looked at so far. So where that comes in handy is when you have a lot of stuff in your floor plan, and picking things one by one or even with a crossing window really wouldn't be very efficient or even possible. So using the filter tool, we can select everything or a group of things that are all sort of grouped together, and we'll just accept the fact that we're picking things that we don't actually want to pick for now, and then we're going to just take those out of the selection using the filter tool. So in other words, if I do a crossing window like this, I've got a door and a window in my selection, and I can just click on the filter tool right here and just take those out by category. So I remove all the windows, I remove all the doors, so I only have walls selected, which is what I was shooting for. I click OK, and now it just gives me that for my selection. Now for some reason this is still showing as highlighted sort of, and I think again I'm probably just having some graphical glitches tonight because I can see that the only thing I have selected are 8 walls. So in this instance I have some exterior walls which are one wall type and some interior walls which are another wall type. And that's why up here in the type selector we can see that multiple types are selected. If I wanted them all to be the same, I could pick a new type, or I can pick one of the 2 types I'm using, and they would all be that type now. You'll see something similar in the properties, right? The instance properties, where the location line, of course, is going to vary a little bit. I drew them differently, perhaps. And the constraints, the top constraints are different between the interior and exterior walls. So those things are going to show up as varies, and anything that has common properties will show up with that property. Okay, I think that's going to do it for us on this first part. Go ahead and save this, and we're going to resume in class this week using this sort of as our framework. We have a fair amount of additional skill to learn on this. We're going to go through all of the modify tools, and then we're just going to share some really neat tips and tricks on different ways that you can draft more efficiently in Revit, saving you time and effort. The more practice we get in with this stuff, the easier the Module 1 skill review, the upcoming assignment, is going to be for you to get this stuff laid out properly. So more to come on this, but for now we'll leave it there, and we'll see you all in class.